Yeah, hey everyone, Justin here. Here to make my first Kamen Rider review in over 5 years, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk about Kamen Rider Hibiki. Yeah, so an announcement about that. I think that from now on, um, I feel that once a month, if I want to do Kamen Rider, one should be a Heisei review and one should be a Showa review. Yeah, out of the Showa series, I've reviewed just the first Kamen Rider Black, Kamen Rider Black RX, um, and yeah, that's all. So yeah, I think that I've already seen all the Showa Kamen Riders, so even though it was a little while ago, but I feel that I should get around to reviewing those. But yeah, today I'll review a Heisei Rider show, Kamen Rider Hibiki. So yes, this was like the 2005, 2006 show, I believe. And yeah, so yeah, what's interesting about Kamen Rider Hibiki before I get into it was conceived by Shotaro Ishinomori, the creator of Kamen Rider, who died before sometime around the end of the 1990s. And even though when he conceived the show, it wasn't originally a Kamen Rider, but it was conceived as something else. But when Toei got around to using the materials and whatnot, they decided to make it a Kamen Rider show, from what I've heard. But yes, the Kamen Riders in this series aren't called Kamen Riders, but Oni, or a traditional Japanese demon. And they fight these monsters called the Makamo, and in order to defeat the Makamo, they have to use particular sounds through acoustic Japanese instruments, which they can weaponize. And one of the riders is the titular Hibiki, and when fighting, he's discovered by this kid named Asumu, this junior high kid who, is going through the growing pains of puberty and, all that shit. And Hibiki and Asumu, he comes from a single mother household. His parents are divorced, and if you don't know anything about Japanese custody, about divorce, thankfully I have no experience in that, but I have heard and seen such experiences where if the parents are divorced, then let's just say most of the time the mother gets the custody, and they don't see the dad again until they're adults. And that's the unfortunate reality of divorce in Japan, and that's just Asumu's situation. And of course, nothing against single mothers or anything like that. And they do portray that Asumu's mother is hardworking and she does her best. And I think that Hibiki, I wouldn't say he's kind of like a father figure. He's more like a big brother figure to Asumu. And, he just comes across as optimistic when he's going through the downsides of puberty. And it's like, hey, everything's going to be all right. But what makes this particular, and speaking of Asumu, what makes this Kamen Rider particularly interesting, that even though that Hibiki is the titular character, it's really more of Asumu's story than Hibiki. They make it very clear that Hibiki, there's really no reason to develop this character. The character who has to go through all the development is mostly Asumu, and of course they do introduce other Kamen Riders later on. And yeah, so for Hibiki, they make it very clear from the start that he's been a Kamen Rider or an Oni for a very long time, and he knows what he's doing. He knows what his powers are. He's trained to use these powers and so on. But Hibiki, he's just mostly as a tool for developing the other cast, and he serves that role very well. Asumu, I think he's a good surrogate for the audience, to a target audience to a certain extent. Of course, we all know that adults love Kamen Rider, especially foreign fans, but we have to remember that the target audience are kids in a domestic point of view. And I think Asumu does fill that role. Yes, later on they introduce other characters like Ibuki and Zanki. and how their organization works. And they all meet at this restaurant called Tachibana, which is, of course, a homage to the character Shohei Tachibana from the Shoei Kamen Rider, who kind of served as like a mentor role to all the original Showa writers. So I thought it was a nice touch, and I'm going to assume that maybe that was an idea of either Ishinomori or maybe the production staff wanting to pay homage to Ishinomori. I don't know which. But anyway, so yes, the core, and later on, they sort of introduce a quote-unquote rival to Asumu, a transfer student named Kiriya, and he kind of forces himself to be Asumu's rival, and the show does pretty much show why they do this, but it just doesn't really feel convincing. The show kind of goes out of its way to make you hate Kiriya. And the actor does it, and when they bring back the actor to play a new Kamen Rider for Kamen Rider Den-O, they make him likable, so it kind of just shows how good the actor is in his particular craft. I mean, he makes the character hateable when he plays this character in this series, and then when he comes back for Den-O, hey, you can actually kind of like him, even though he's still kind of a douchebag, but he's a likable douchebag in Den-O, but he's not a likable douchebag in Hibiki. As Kiriya. I don't remember the actor's name at the top of my head. But yes, of course, as it is sort of common practice in the Japanese entertainment industry, most especially anime and tokusatsu, halfway in, they do change writers and all that. And apparently the actor who plays Hibiki, I don't remember his name off the top of my head too, apparently he didn't like this. When they were doing the first half of the series, when they were doing the writers' meetings and all that, he was part of the, he was always participating in the meetings, and he was given creative freedom with the character, but when they changed them, they just didn't allow that for him. But yeah, speaking of the actor who plays Hibiki, I mean, when it comes to, either Showa or Heisei Kamen Riders, most especially Heisei, they always use newcomers to play the Kamen Rider. But what makes Hibiki unique is, especially with Ibuki and Hibiki, they already use pre-established actors. Like the guy who, when we say fresh actors, we're talking people like between 18 and 21. I mean, when we got Hibiki, I think the actor who played him was already in his mid-20s, early 30s, and he was already a well-established actor, and he was also probably a model before that for, apparently, he was like a real hot attraction for, let's say, the mothers of the children, and they were really drawn to that actor. And the guy who plays Ibuki, he was Tuxedo Mask in the live-action Sailor Moon. So I thought that was really interesting they brought him. And I know the guy who plays Zanki, or Todoroki, Todoroki, sorry, I'm mixing up with the character he plays in Gado. He comes back as Zanki in Gado. Yeah, I'll make that correction right now. I said Zanki, which was a character from Gado, and then he plays Todoroki in this one. Yes, my bad. I fucked up. But anyway, so, yes. I mean, the story has a very, very, very strong beginning. But when it turns halfway, especially when they introduces Kiriya, it just goes, and when it goes down, 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 ending, boom, clusterfuck. I mean, I'm not going to get into what the ending was. I mean, like, what the fuck was the ending anyway? Yeah, I mean, and apparently the staff has kind of acknowledged that, like, it hasn't technically ended. I mean, like, first there's this fight, and then all of a sudden it's just ended, and then you see what happens with Asumu and Kiriya. It's like, what the fuck is this? I mean, of course, I mean, when you get to Asumu's ending, the series kind of builds up to that ending, but either way, it just kind of didn't really feel right to me. Yes, Asumu has a full, clear arc, but I guess it's because it's not the arc that the fans are hoping for. which is why they don't like it. And that's a very understandable argument. But everything else is just a fucking clusterfuck. That's all I can say. Yeah, so about the costumes. The costumes are pretty rad. That's what I liked about this series. I mean, it really does try to show you that this isn't your typical Kamen Rider. It wasn't, after all, it was never conceived as a traditional Kamen Rider series. Just want to check my time. I'm good. But yeah, so, yeah, it does a really good job of portraying what it needs to portray, but like with the way how the helmets are shaped. Of course, it does get the job in telling you, like, hey, this is meant to be Kamen Rider in the, you know, with how it is. The action is pretty fun. I mean, when you're in the first episode, one of the cool features of the helmets was it could shoot fire out of its helmet. But apparently, you know, parents were snowflakes and they thought it was too fucking scary. But yeah, anyway, the action is pretty well choreographed. I mean, there's a certain strategy to each monster. I mean, for this monster, you have to use, let's say, a drum. For this, you have to use something more acoustic. For this, you have to use something more percussion. And there's always a particular strategy involved with how to defeat a certain enemy. For example, Ibuki's specialty can't defeat this monster, but let's say Todoroki's can. I'm not going to get into the spoilers, but it's really cool. But yeah, the action is one of the highlights of this series. And the music, considering the nature of this series, it's mostly uses Japanese traditional percussions and acoustics. Of course, when it comes to Todoroki, he uses a electric guitar. Granted, he's not Van Halen, but, you know, it's just what it is. So, yeah, I'm not sure how to recommend this series. I mean, if you want something definitive, that's kind of very... If you want something definitively good, you're going to enjoy the first half. But, you know, once it goes downhill, you know, shit. But, yeah, if you want a good story, first half has it. Asumu, I mean, he's a pretty likable character. I mean, I do give credit for Hibiki for trying to do something new, where the driving character is not the Kamen Rider, but just like this kid who befriends him. It does give a different sense of character development. Asumu gets his character development, but I'm not sure if that's the character development you want when you get to the ending. But, you know, out of curiosity, you're free to watch it. So, yeah, this is my review of Kamen Rider Hibiki.